Hello, friends, and welcome to Leader Site, where we explore leadership and seek to provide people with a little bit of foresight, a little bit of insight, a little bit of 2020 hindsight. Today's going to be different. I'm looking forward to this. John Rubright, the Vice President of the Office of Research for the National Board of Medical Examiners, who I interviewed in January, turned the tables on me and said, I'd like to interview you. So, hi, John.
Hi, Eric. Thanks for having me, and thanks for being willing to have a mirror being held up to the person who's usually the one asking the questions in these situations.
John, it's easier to ask the questions than answer them.
Uh, is it? Maybe we can explore that a little bit today.
Sure, anything goes, John.
So I'm going to be facilitating today's conversation, and I'm going to allow Erik Thompson to do what he always does, which is manage the Zoom functionality and make sure we're on track and share his PowerPoint slides. And about half an hour to 35 minutes into our conversation, we'll do the traditional leader site activity of placing the attendees in small breakout rooms so that all of you will have the opportunity to talk with other members of this conversation, to reflect on parts of this conversation that resonated with you or things you'd like to dig into a little bit more deeply. So we'll do that a little bit later in the hour. Erik, we'll get started.
Let's do this.
Well, I know most of the people on the line right now know you, and you usually start out these conversations by reading out somebody's bio. So we're going to get to pieces of your bio, I think, throughout our conversation, but I was wondering if you could start by talking about when were you first introduced to Bowen systems thinking,
Yeah.
and what attracted you to that particular framework?
Mhm. Yeah. So, John, it was in a really tough time in my life. I had gotten a master's degree in clinical psychology, and I had married my college uh, love of my life at the time. And I think we had a tremendous amount of appreciation and love for each other, but not a sufficient amount of emotional maturity
Hmm.
to be having a stable, satisfying marriage. And I was looking for help, and I was a little bit on my knees. I'd been using all the stuff I knew from my clinical psychology education to try to make the situation better. And honestly, it was making it worse.
Hmm.
So I was a little bit one of those end of the rope kind of experiences. And maybe partly that creates an openness in you. I had a friend tell me there's this person in town, Dr. Ann Bunting, and she's unique. She's got this different framework. And I met her. I called her up, and she said to me, "Well, why don't you read a book, and then maybe if you like the book, you can talk to me." Which was that was unique. That was very striking. I've never, as you say, I've never forgotten that move. So I devoured the book in 3 days. It was The Dance of Anger by Harriet Lerner, which Harriet Lerner was a student of Murray Bowen's at Menninger. When Menninger was the premier psychiatric institution in the country, and Murray Bowen was a sort of a rock star there, developing new ways of thinking about the family and family leadership. And I knew right away how, probably 50 pages into the book, that it was a very different way of thinking than I'd been using.
Hmm.
And literally, the situation changed very dramatically during those 50 pages for me.
Hmm.
So then I just got really into it. I started teaching it, studying it up and down. I did postgraduate training on it, and I started using it in all the situations I was involved professionally.
Hmm.
And I consider it the foundation of my happy second marriage.
Hmm. I
Yeah.
find that fascinating. One would assume, given your clinical background, that you
Mhm.
would have approached this from kind of a professional place of intrigue, and yet it came from a place that was really sounds like designed to help you.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's funny, John, I mean, I'm a guy who's always had plenty of neurosis. I have had lots of self-doubt, and I now view that as a gift because I think it's just my introspective nature, and um, I'm aware of what's going on,
Hmm.
and it's there's strengths and weaknesses in nature. We need all kinds of people, but the kind of guy I am was learned a lot through my troubles,
Hmm.
and I'm extremely grateful to Dr. Bunting
Hmm.
because turns out this body of knowledge that I needed, so I got into it. When you need it, you get into it.
Hmm.
Was incredibly useful to a lot of people since then,
Hmm.
and that was like 30 years ago.
Hmm. So there's a couple of transitions that I'll note. There's a transition of you learning about that framework to apply it to your own life. There's a transition to you then applying that in your clinical work with the folks you were working with. And then there's an additional step of then you taking that to, well, I'm going to talk to how people can use this in their professional lives and in a business setting.
Right.
Um, so how did you make those transitions, and what made you have an aha moment that you could then apply that thinking to these various different constituencies, for lack of a better word?
Dumb luck. I mean, it's a great question. Much to my shock, the business world is full of human beings and full of relationships. Relationships are so important. And I didn't ever picture myself being a business coach,
Hmm.
but it's a really good fit for me. I love it. Um, and I wasn't planning this, but what happened is I I I became a sort of a young figure in this Bowen network to some degree. I published some things. I was presenting at conferences, and somebody in the network who was using it with businesses approached me and said, "I need somebody to help me do stuff
Hmm.
with clients." And I was like, "Okay, I'm adventurous. That's one thing about me." I hitchhiked from Connecticut to Colorado when I was 18. And my dad and mom was like, "Okay, well, where are you headed? Where are you going to go?" And I said, I don't know, and I don't want to know."
Hmm.
So I started using it, and right off the bat, um, it was clear that the stuff I knew about was useful to them. It just kind of took off, and I was ready for that too. I don't like being bored, John.
Yeah.
I like new adventures, and it was really exciting to be doing it in a completely different space.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I heard you say adventurous, being excited, and you saw the applicability to that new space.
Mhm.
And a few moments ago, you talked a little bit about your own self-doubt and neuroses.
Oh, yeah.
And um, so that first engagement in a new context,
Mm.
um, I'm wondering how that felt for you.
Oh, I was terrified. I remember the first meeting, I literally didn't sleep, which I always sleep. I was in a hotel, and the first group session I was gonna do was gonna happen in that hotel, and I didn't fall asleep.
Hmm.
I was up all night shaking, and 15 years ago. Yeah. You know what I've started to realize is that those kind of the sleeplessness is part of conscientiousness.
Hmm.
And probably in the last 5 years, I've become more and more comfortable being the way I am
Hmm.
and seeing all of it, even the self doubt, as part of uh, there's a gift, there's a side of it that's a gift.
Hmm.
I was always embarrassed of it, John.
Yeah.
I was not proud of it when I was in high school, and through my 20s. But I'm less that way now.
It sounds more integrated than perhaps you were when you were younger. That's something that. Thanks for sharing that about your background.
Mhm.
We talked a little bit about my journey through some of those issues when we first met. I believe it was 2015. You were teaching your Leading by Managing Self course at the American Institute of CPAs. And um, I think some of you know you from, some of the people on this Zoom call know you from a individual coaching perspective. Some of us know you through that course that you taught. I'm wondering if you can give some background on uh, what is your Leading by Managing Self course? What do you try to accomplish? And
Mhm.
given that I know you've been doing that for a number of years, how has it kind of changed over time?
Mm. Thank you. I love the course. So thank you, Mike Decker, for inviting me to work with John Rubright in 2015. Mike's on the call and trusting me to come and try to help his team, and trusting me to experiment with this course. So I've had a lot of friends who helped me experiment with this course over 15 years, refining it. Mike described it once as having a laser focus on relationship management. So I think there's all kinds of good stuff out there about leadership, and mine is just one of many good things. And mine is really about succeeding in social networks, which is my massive passion and fascination. And I have this huge lucky advantage that Murray Bowen created a theory, and I ran into Dr. Bunning, and it's just very useful to people. So succeeding in staying cool under fire with other people who stimulate us more than anybody, more than anything else. Staying connected, even to the people who think you're really, really wrong and maybe want to take you out, even. And also taking stands. So I think that triple combo is baked into the DNA of the course. And one thing I really love about it is people go on adventures. The course sets people on adventures. It's not really about what happens within the meeting. That's the real action, but what they do as a result of the adventures they take and then come share with each other. What do you think? Did I describe it pretty well? You took the journey.
I took the journey. I went on those adventures. I went on the sidebar adventures. I think that's an accurate description. And I know you've worked with a number of different organizations that span a number of different kind of sectors of business.
Mhm.
Um, and what kind of change have you seen in organizations? Not
Mm.
just people, but the organizations that are made up of those people after working with you and your course.
Yeah. One thing, all these different industries, once again, people everywhere you go. People who are dealing with each other everywhere you go, trying to succeed together, differing. Um, I think for some of my client companies, it's created a very usable, relatable, common language for how to think about leadership excellence and emotional maturity, which is a feature of leadership excellence.
Hmm.
Um, I don't pretend that it created that out of nowhere. I think the people I've worked with have been pretty amazing, but I think it's been useful to them in capturing some of their own wisdom that way.
Hmm.
I would also add, this is a good question. It's helpful for me to try to articulate this. I would also add that the Bowen leadership theory is a change management technology. It's really about, there's a lot of information and about how to skillfully and rather forcefully, but also gracefully drive change in a social network. So, the companies I work with have been, having to evolve. I mean, right away at the beginning, they have ideas, and sort of the most creative people are the people who are responsible for thinking about where we're going, have pivots they want to make in how the business has been operating. And that I think the course and the Bowen theory is a really useful tool for people who want to drive change. So I've seen, really dramatic, is that the right word? Dynamic is probably even a better word. Evolution in some of my client companies. I think I've helped with that. Yeah. And also they get to know each other better. I love that they see each other as humans more completely as a part of this journey.
Yeah.
Which seems to do a lot of good. It helps, Why does it help so much, John? Can I ask you that?
I think it's easy to see a title. Here's another person who needs to get their stuff done, and they're getting in my way because they're not helping me. And really, there's kind of another person that is that title. And once you realize that, then you can look at your relationship that you have with that person, and then it becomes not just there's a block there, but realizing that there's a relationship opportunity opens you up to being able to make some different moves to change the dynamic. Where if you don't know somebody or you see them just as a title, it doesn't give you a clear space to make actionable progress and next steps.
Maybe we could call that humanizing the high stakes relationship challenges that are inevitable to the life of the business leader. And that humanizing process is one of the ways you get through it and come out with something better at the end. And also to mention that there's a number of people on this call who I think are amazing leaders. And the people who work for them greatly appreciate them and appreciate the fact that they are related to as people. I was just talking to Mary McClure, who's the CEO of Green Mountain Power, about how we might think about supporting her staff on a wellness journey, including meditation. And I was struck by her passion for the people who work on the line in her company and how she relates to them as humans. She's a Division I basketball college star, lawyer person who relates to these guys and gals who work on the lines with work gloves on very well. Yeah, love that.
And you can listen to that interview on the YouTube channel that Erik has set up for Leader Site, a previous interview with.
I love how he's pitching me here. This is amazing. So nice to not do it myself. Thank you.
Well, yeah. There's a wealth of information on the YouTube channel from these previous recordings, and so it's nice to make those connections.
Yeah, and can I mention one here since you're at it? Is this one here. By the way, this guy is Dr. Ann Bunting's son, the principal of the high school my daughters go to, and he's a special person, special leader. So that's a couple weeks from now. This one here, which you can watch the recording of, is really quite a story. Ernie Pomerleau is a significant person in this community. His cousin is married to Senator Patrick Leahy, who's the current Senator pro tempore. Very grounded person who has had an unusually heavy dose of death and of loved ones, including the death of his only daughter this fall. And this interview, John, was really special. Ernie tears up during the interview, and he talks about how these deaths opened up a door to him to something very, very deep and profound that has changed his life. And I'm just really glad we had that one recorded, and he's going to come back because it went so well. So many people have said it was really moving. We've had people write poems about it. In April, he's going to come back to keep going on that.
Great.
This is also a really cool thing. Polarization Leadership. We did a conference that you can listen to. This Matt Dickinson is quite something. His main message, political scientist from Middlebury College, is that we're far less polarized than we appear. We have a lot more in common than you might think.
So it looks like we have a few more minutes before maybe engaging in a breakout activity, and maybe this might be a good final question to squeeze in before that activity. We've talked a bit about your coaching of leaders and your training of leaders in cohorts with the class that you run, Leading by Managing Self.
A lot of the build-up.
People often look to you for professional development. So they ask you, what book should I read? What are activities I can engage in to improve my own professional development? And I'm curious about your own professional development. What activities do you go through to make you feel like you're staying on top of your game?
I'm a lifelong learner, so I'm adventurous when it comes to ideas. Kind of comes naturally to me. I've been a risk taker in all the jobs I've had. Those are the first things that come to mind. I mean, certainly books have meant a lot to me. Podcasts, I'm a sort of a picky podcast guy. I listen to a lot of, lately I am on a jag about physics and the science of consciousness, which is pretty far out stuff that I really like about the nature of the universe and consciousness as potentially a fundamental constituent, not just of our minds, but of the whole universe. What's that got to do with helping business leaders? Well, it does, because business leadership does get into something pretty soulful. The soul matters when it comes to business leadership, because the people who watch their leaders, pay attention to their leaders more fully than leaders often realize how much they're watched. That's deep in the DNA of human beings, that they watch their leaders. Monkey studies and chimp studies have powerfully verified that fact. The state of their soul ends up having a gigantic impact on other people watching them. And so I spend time attending to my soul, if you will, to some of the deepest questions I have, and really honestly, the number one professional development activity that I've been really into for the last 5 years is transcendental meditation. So in Bowen theories, there's this idea that a non-anxious presence is a huge benefit to any group. And that there's a dynamic non-anxious presence that's defined in Bowen leadership theory. But this non-anxious piece is something I've studied intellectually my whole career, And I find the intellect to be a somewhat limited tool in containing anxiety.
Hmm.
I mean, it's good, but it's not great.
Thinking your way out of your own anxiety.
Thinking your way out of your own anxious thoughts. Good point, John. And transcendental meditation has been extraordinary for me in this space. It's surprised me the degree to which it's impacted my level of poise and calm
Hmm.
in amidst the challenges I deal with in my family and in my business, my dynamic business, my ever-changing business that means a lot to me. And I've noticed the presence that poise that I touch into when I meditate, I've noticed it impacting how I operate in my business.
Yeah. He said, unfortunately, he sent it to my phone number, which doesn't work with Zelle. So I told him he has to send it.
Hi, Renee.
Did
That
I answer your question?
you did, and I'm curious. I'm curious if your practice of meditation, not your practice of meditation, but if
Mhm.
your perception of your practice or the impact of your practice, has that changed over your 5 years? Um, how has that felt different for you, or if it has?
You mean like how has the practice evolved? Or is that
How,
what you, or were you asking something else?
I imagine your practice has been, knowing what I do know about transcendental meditation, your practice has been relatively stable, I'd assume, of how you actually go through it. But
Mhm.
has the impact on your poise changed over time?
Yeah, it's been cumulative. I've been doing it a long time, John. I've been doing it 40 years. So I got hooked on it and I never stopped
Hmm.
because it kept delivering value. But and I do hate to be that guy who's talking about transcendental meditation, but at the same time, it's time for me to do this in my life. I've kept it really quiet for a long time.
Hmm.
And I know there's a lot of ways to get at these sorts of outcomes. And I honor all the different ways that people do this. But for me, no question about it. Um, it's been a cumulative impact. You know, the teachers of TM predicted that. And I
Hmm.
was skeptical. I was like, yeah, well, that'll be somebody else. Somebody else has a cumulative impact. For me, it's just gonna, make me feel a little better every day. But yeah, I feel a deeper well of inner stability, John.
Hmm.
Deeper well that I draw from. And it's definitely been a feature of the last 5 years, my being surprised by this.
Hmm.
Hmm.
So that well kind of gets dug a little bit deeper as your practice gets longer.
Water from a deeper well. Isn't there a song that has that line in it?
I'm sure there is. I'm not aware of it.
Emmylou Harris sings a song about that.
Hmm.
Looking for the water from a deeper well.
Hmm.
Deep well down under the earth stays cool all the time. Isn't subject to the changes in temperature on the surface.
Hmm.
And I am not cool all the time, but I'm cooler.
I
Yeah.
was just reflecting that some of the leadership professional development that many of us have done have focused on, as a leader, here are some strategies you could use to be effective in these
Yeah.
different situations. And
Yeah.
if we only had a playbook that we knew how to play a certain play depending on what the field looked like, then that's what leadership is. It's having a deep playbook. And you're talking a lot more about the soul and the person that's underneath that. So strategy is a part of it, but kind of the care and feeding of the person who executes that strategy is as vital.
Well said. I used to teach cognitive behavioral skills, and it was very clear to me that people's ability to use them varied tremendously depending on something deeper in them. And just today, I was talking to an inspiring guy who's trying to learn. And during the talk, I was thinking to myself, the solution to his problem is not a bunch of tips and tricks. His journey involves knowing himself more deeply.
Hmm.
If he wants to get the outcomes that are very concrete, that he's seeking, he's going to have to do that. And after I thought that, the conversation wound its way towards me saying that later. And it was good. It went well.
I think
Yeah.
that's something that I found to be rarer in the kind of leadership literature, is kind of recognizing that piece of it.
Yeah, I'm not sure if, the who you are message sells quite as well as here's 5 tricks,
2-minute redirects. Isn't there, there's a book or
cupcakes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're about 30 minutes in. Erik, do you think this would be a good place to send our attendees out to have small groups?
On a regular basis, I have people say, don't do the breakout thing, Erik. But then I have a lot more people say, that was really good. It ended too quick. I wish we had more time to do the breakout thing. So I'm pretty into the breakout thing because I like to give people the opportunity to think. So we're going to tee that up for you now. What's today's discussion got you thinking about? And what leadership actions does today's discussion inspire you to consider? Are the suggested questions. And I have these suggestions about how to manage the breakout process, that if one of you in the breakout room just can kind of launch in and say, hey, here's what I'm thinking about, and talk for a few minutes and then pass the baton, somebody else talks. That's a good way to do it because the time will fly by. And I will set these breakout rooms up now, and then afterwards we'll come back and talk some more. And if you're like a really not wanting to get involved in this breakout experience, or you're too busy right now to do it, you could come back in 10 minutes and rejoin us. That is an option. So what do we do now, John Rubright?
Well, it's nice to see everybody back here in our main room. It's a little scary to get shoved into another room and come back. I'm always worried I'm going to end up in another application or another place that I shouldn't be. So it's nice I'm in the right place. So I thought maybe we could give an opportunity if individuals had thoughts or questions that came up during their small groups discussion, if they wanted to share what came up in their group discussion, or ask a question that was generated from our earlier conversation. I'll just look in the participants. You can raise your hand, or small enough, you can just unmute yourself and say hello.
All right, here we go. We had a lot of water metaphors going on, the deep well, and we started talking a little bit about the wake that we leave, and being that calming, entering a situation, I suppose, as calm, as opposed to amped up and getting excited, or that was my take on it anyway. So please correct me if I got that wrong, but that's how I saw it, was be the calm part, and then and enter that situation that way, and try not to get.
Nathan, where does that get real for you as a leader of a team that manages a very, very gigantic, high-tech thing called the power grid in Vermont? Where does that get real for you in terms of your leadership of that team?
there's a lot of people there, right? And actually, we're not a giant, we're Vermont, right? So, in my world, it's pretty big, and but we have a lot of different personalities, right? And helping those personalities come together to solve the problem or deal with the issue at hand. You need to take a deep breath. In fact, that's what I tell our operators, right? When something happens, don't do anything. Take a deep breath, look around, calm down, and then start making the connections. That's kind of an individual piece of it, but when you bring the group in, it's really no different, I think. Take a deep breath, what's going on, evaluate, and go from there.
In Indian philosophy, John, there's a interesting understanding of the centrality of the breath to mind. So Jason's talking about take a deep breath. We all know that phrase, and it's really interesting. The breath is considered to be fundamental to the mind. And how we breathe in a situation is probably more detectable by others unconsciously than we realize.
Yeah. I can relate to that. Are you taking shallow, anxious breaths? Or are you taking deeper, more calming breaths? It's something very noticeable about individuals when they're standing in front of you. And I like that metaphor of talking more about water and when the water is choppy and there are bigger waves. And if you jump in the pool, are you adding to the energy and creating more waves, or are you acting as a bit of a dampener to calm the waters?
Cannonball.
So I've seen some cannonballs.
Yeah, and I've noticed that
Today?
I've seen some
Sorry,
cannonballs
John.
today.
We work at the same place, I just had to say.
With, Elizabeth and I had some meetings together today. I heard some cannonballs.
interesting to me how over time a senior executive who too often cannonballs into choppy waters loses the trust of their senior partners. And of course, there is a time to come in with a good cannonball. But it's a strategic choice rather than a reactive choice. I'd love to hear, Elizabeth, any reflections from you. Looks like Jason's got something to add too. You want to just do that, Jason, first?
Well, I just wanted to ask John or Elizabeth, when the cannonball gets executed into the pool, what's your reaction?
That's great. What a great question. Thank you. Well, that's when this training really kicks in, I have to say. Because first, you don't worry, it's not a reaction. It's a step back. It's almost like a step up. I call it going to the balcony. And I think Jonathan does that extremely effectively. We go up to the balcony, take a look at what's going on. And then my first question to myself in my role is, what is needed from me right now? And so when that cannonball comes in, I'm, what is needed from me right now? It's the question I ask and then try to execute on that. What would you say, Jonathan?
Well, thank you for sharing that. I like the balcony analogy. It reminds me of a quote that I got from Erik Thompson. Sometimes not making things worse is a great contribution. So by not adding to the cannonball, that can be really, really effective. I think another approach that you build with people over time is when there are cannonball situations, you have relationships with other people in the room. You have relationships with people throughout the organization who, and you can, I don't know, use isn't the right word. Leverage sounds not like the right word either necessarily, but rely on, honor, trust, the relationships that you've built in situations where things get sticky. So the work that you do before cannonballs start raining down is so much more important than kind of what happens when the pool's in front of you. Because when it's in front of you, it's there and there's only so much you can do, but it can take a long time to develop the relationships and the understandings to be more effective in that moment with your colleagues that are around you. You know, it does remind me of some of the conversation I just had with my small group around Erik's philosophy of not just tips and tricks and strategies, but feeding the soul and growing yourself. And that's so much harder and takes so much more time, and can have a much longer term impact when you're approached with or encounter more cannonball situations.
As my daughter would say, word. Does take more time. It's a sophisticated tool. This sophisticated tool that I think is very important for teams that need to be creative.
So Erik, how do you sell that when someone's like, I need a toolbox to help me fix these nuts that are too tight that I need to loosen? And you say, well, you need to work on your wrenches first because, you know, you have more work to do than just some tips and tricks in front of you. Does that affect who you work with? Or I'm wondering what that conversation sounds like if you encounter people that have resistance to kind of the approach that you've talked about here.
I don't fight the resistance too much. I think I don't know. Increasingly, I just sales to me is just talking to people and testing fit. You know, it's I think that's my first answer is why fight the resistance? I think there's certain people out there who like the movies I make and the products I have and the way I talk about them, and it's very important for them to decide what they want to invest in. It might not be me, might not be Bowen leadership theory, but I think, you know, I've had a journey of learning how to talk in ways that business people understand and not using language that's too fancy from, you know, family systems theory. Meet people where they are. And, you know, usually the people who like Thompson leadership are people who have a very strong interest and a feel an imperative to make relationships really successful, and to have a sophisticated HR toolbox, as one of my clients, Ben Pearson, called it, a sophisticated HR toolbox. I thought that was pretty good. He said he wanted his team to have a more sophisticated HR toolbox. And I felt pretty sure we could provide that.
I'm struck by that because it's very different than some of the what you hear from other leadership training philosophies. And it seems like you're approaching that from a very kind of humble position of, I have an orienting, grounded framework that I ascribe to, and that might work really well for you and it might not, and that's okay. That's kind of what I heard.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's like my job is to help people figure out what they want to do, not tell them what to do or how to think. As much as I love to do that, because I like to seem really important and really smart.
And I've asked Erik those questions. Just tell me what to do in the situation. He'll usually ask a really good question in response.
Mm.
So Erik, I'm sensitive to, we're coming towards the end of our time.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if this might be a good point to remind our listeners of what's coming up in the coming weeks.
Yep. Yeah, just a reminder. And again, these are all available on my LeaderSite YouTube channel that my producer, Roz Saunders, who's on this call and is incredibly awesome, helps me create. I love these pictures, John. Roz helped me create this. I just like all the smiles, you know? I think this really is what it feels like to do the work I do. And what's coming up in April? This one with Ernie Pomerleau. If you get a chance to listen to this recording, if you're interested in this kind of thing, lessons from grief, spirituality, this is really was quite amazing. And then I think this is the next one coming up is Adam Bunting, Power of Culture, Lessons from a High School Principal. Man, if you can do it with high school students, you got something. Adam Bunting's grandmother was the president of Radcliffe, and his father was the provost of the Vermont State College system. And Adam runs a high school very happily. So he's got something there, and he's got a pedigree. It's amazing the way my daughters talk about him. They just think he's the greatest. He's funny. He stops. He asks them how they're doing. He means it when he asks. And they do have a pretty special culture. And high school is a very important place. As one of Adam's mentors says, high school is a great time to make some big mistakes. So those are the kinds of leadership wisdom pearls I'm going to be pulling out of Adam. Another one of his is follow the laughter to the learning. So Adam's the next one.
With that, I want to thank Erik for allowing himself to be in the hot seat, so to speak, and be the one who gets asked questions as opposed to being the one who is asking the questions.
So a little nervous about it, John, but it wasn't so bad.
It wasn't so bad.
No.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, John, for doing this with me and being interested, and all of you for being here with us. It's a community that matters to me. It's really good to see your faces. All of you. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Erik, and I look forward to the next LeaderSite.